Hello everyone, it's Ty. Today, I thought I'd try my hand at another guide, this time for our spicy hot Foxian, Jiaoqiu. When Jiaoqiu first released in 2.4, my excitement was through the roof. At the time, Sunday was little more than a hope and a prayer, so I figured if we're never going to get a male harmony buffer, I'll bloody well make do with damage amplification from debuffs. And as the very loud naysayers dismissed and skipped him as little more than an Acheron bot, I found that Jiaoqiu was so much greater than that. Jiaoqiu is a fire nihility character whose main purpose is to apply a stacking vulnerability to all enemies and to increase ultimate damage dealt by teammates. The main power of his kit comes from his talent. When he hits an enemy with his basic, skill, or ultimate, he has a 100% base chance to apply a stack of Ashen Roast to that enemy. Each stack of Ashen Roast increases the damage received by the enemy up to a maximum of 5 stacks. With his talent at level 10, that's a 35% vulnerability debuff, or a 1.35 multiplier to all damage dealt to that enemy. It also counts as a dot, doing 180% of Jiaoqiu's attack as fire damage at the start of each enemy turn. The damage doesn't increase per stack of Ashen Roast, unfortunately, but it's still a pretty solid bit of consistent damage to be coming from a support. And that's what makes his basic attack actually great. It's a single target attack doing 100% of Jiaoqiu's attack as fire damage, which is pretty whatever, but his talent means that he also applies and refreshes Ashen Roast while generating a skill point as basic attacks do. His skill is a blast attack, hitting the main target for 150% attack and adjacent targets for 90% attack. Again, you're not using his skill for its damage. Its main use is its own 100% base chance to apply a stack of Ashen Roast. So, since his skill will also trigger his talent, he can get his stacks up quite quickly. Finally, his ultimate is a bit verbose, but is actually really simple. In short, it effectively maxes out everyone's Ashen Roast stacks, and it makes all the enemies take 15% more ultimate damage. Plus, oh my god, the sexy Jiaoqiu glow? Oh, yes please. It also does a pittance of damage itself, but that's neither here nor there. More specifically, it activates a zone that lasts for 3 of Jiaoqiu's turns, and enemies in that zone, so all enemies, have their Ashen Roast stacks set to whatever the highest number of stacks on the field is. For instance, if you're fighting 5 enemies and you've managed to get 4 stacks on one enemy, but only 1 or 2 stacks on the others, the ult will put everyone at 4 stacks. Although technically 5 because the ult would trigger the talent as well and apply another stack. Also, whenever enemies take action while the zone is active, there's a 60% base chance they'll gain another stack of Ashen Roast all on their own. That effect can only apply 6 times, unfortunately, which is an annoying and honestly unnecessary limitation, but ideally you'll be popping off his ult so frequently that it won't affect you much. So, as you can probably tell, his ultimate is very important to his kit and role, and his major traces work towards reinforcing that. 1, Pyre Cleanse, gives Jiaoqiu a jump start towards his first ult, giving him 15 energy at the start of battle. Kinda whatever, but every little bit helps. Another, Seared Scent, truly solidifies the purpose of his ult. Anytime a new enemy enters the field while his zone is up, their stacks are immediately set to the highest value currently on the field, and that's usually going to be 5, so this helps keep all your enemies at max stacks without having to work too hard for it. The last, Hearth Kindle, is an effect hit rate to attack percent conversion, making every 15% of effect hit rate beyond 80% into 60% more attack, up to a total of 240%. Simply put, once you get your EHR to 140%, you'll gain 240% attack. Makes it pretty clear exactly how you want to gear him up, hey? Because his primary function will be damage amplification support, and there aren't, as of now, any 4-piece sets that help him do that job better, your best option will be a 2-piece speed set, Messenger or Sacerdos, and some other 2-piece set. Your options there are either the other 2-piece speed set, a 2-piece attack percent set, 2-piece Firesmith, or 2-piece Pioneer. Personally, I use and recommend Pioneer, because the rest of the options aren't terribly useful. The extra speed from a second 2-piece speed set is only useful in the beginning of a battle when you're working to get your stacks up. 2-piece attack percent would only serve to oversaturate the already pretty saturated attack, and the 10% damage bonus from Firesmith is just objectively less than the 12% damage from Pioneer. For planers, I find Pancosmic to be the best to alleviate some of the strain of reaching his EHR requirements. Plus, it synergizes quite well with him since it also converts EHR to attack. But if you have some incredible EHR rolls on your gear, or you just prefer him to be even more of a supportive buffer, Fleet, Keel, Lushaka, and Penacony are all great options, depending on what your team needs buffed. For main stats, you'll want Effect Hit Rate Body, Speed Boots, Fire Damage Orb, and an Energy Regeneration Rope. Overall, he's very straightforward to build. You'll want some speed and attack percent to improve his energy regeneration and damage, but mainly focus on getting your EHR to 140% first. And one of the best ways to alleviate the struggle to hit that goal is with one of the Lightcones that give EHR. In fact, the best Lightcone for effect hit rate, and for him period, is his signature, Those Many Springs. It gives a whopping 60% EHR just at S1 alone, making building him to his 140% much less painful. Not only that, but his basic, skill, and ultimate now apply an additional debuff that, for him, immediately equates to an additional 24% vulnerability. Together with his Ashen Roast, that's 59% vulnerability, a 1.59 damage multiplier. And yeah, technically it's a 60% base chance to apply that extra debuff, but if you're hitting the 140 EHR goal, it's nearly guaranteed. Honestly, every other 5-star pales in comparison, but there are a couple runners-up. Solitary Healing has the benefit of being purchasable from the Herda shop, but the break effect means mostly nothing, and the energy regen is only really useful in pure fiction. Welt's signature, In the Name of the World, is mostly only useful for Jiaoqiu's personal damage, but it gives an effect hit rate buff to skill, and only skill, which I suppose could be useful in some kind of niche situation, but you'd honestly be better off using one of the 4-stars that actually give EHR. For instance, the most free-to-play option of the 4-stars, Silverwolf's Event Lightcone, before the tutorial mission starts. You may already have it from the event, and if you don't, that's fine too, because you can buy it from the Herda shop. Unfortunately, it is pretty much just a stat stick for the 40% EHR it gives at S5, because unless you're running Jiaoqiu with someone else who does defense reduction, you won't be able to proc the energy regen. Eyes of the Prey gives exactly the same amount of EHR at S5, and Jiaoqiu can actually benefit from the dot damage increase, but it's a gacha cone, so you may not have it at all, let alone at S5. In fact, arguably his best 4-star light cone, Resolution Shines as Pearls of Sweat, is also a gacha cone. With it, Jiaoqiu can add Def Shred to his repertoire with a 12 to 16% def reduction, depending on your superimposition. Unfortunately, as a gacha cone, getting it to S5, or getting it at all, may be a struggle. I've been playing since 1.3, and I still only have 2 copies. Finally, if you're really keen to build him for damage, there's Good Night and Sleep Well, or It's Showtime. Good Night and Sleep Well gives a pretty solid stacking damage buff for every debuff on the enemy up to 3. Jiaoqiu himself can apply 2 debuffs, Ashen Roast and Pyrograph Arcanum, the debuff from his ult. So even something as simple as a Break Dot can max out this cone's ability. But Good Night is also a gacha cone, so may be hard to get a hold of. Meanwhile, It's Showtime gives a pretty solid stacking damage buff, as well as an attack percent increase when the wearer's EHR is 80% or higher, which Jiaoqiu's would definitely be, and it's available freely from the Lightcone shop. But the damage is a bit lower than that of Good Night Sleep Well. As for 3 stars, they're all pretty much useless. They all have 3-star base stats for starters, and only Void, with its rather hefty 40% EHR, comes close to having any value to Jiaoqiu's whole deal. But even that only lasts for 3 turns from the start of battle. With so many other options that you can pick up from the shops, you're really just better off using one of those. So, to summarize, his Lightcone options come in 3 flavors. His best, his EHR stat sticks, and everything else. In something of a twist, my free-to-play Husbando recommendation is to get his signature if you have the pulls to spare. It is such a strong addition to his damage amping capabilities that it is almost criminal that it's sold separately. But if you're saving for some other upcoming Husbando, of course, that's absolutely going to take precedence. So you should instead use Resolution Shines if you have it. If you don't have that, then your next bet will be Eyes of the Prey at S5 if you have it. If not, then Tutorial Mission from the shop at S5. Beyond that, you're just going to be looking at options that only help his personal damage, or solitary healing, which is only really useful in pure fiction. So yeah, my Jiaoqiu advice is already leaning towards the costly, and we've not even mentioned the Eidolons yet, so buckle up, because yeah, his E1 is fantastic for making him the male damage amplifier that we want him to be. With it, everyone in his team deals 40% increased damage to enemies with Ashen Roast. And that's a damage bonus buff that everyone in the team gets, which, when factored together with his vulnerability debuff, can bring his damage amplification up to the levels of Ruan Mei. Say goodbye to needing Tingyun or Hanya for their damage buffs. It's Jiaoqiu's time, baby! It also makes his talent apply an extra Ashen Roast so you can get your stacks up really fast. And if you're really hell-bent on him doing damage, you can go for his E2, which increases his dot multiplier by 300%. At that point, it becomes difficult to tell if he's a support that does DPS, or a DPS with supportive capabilities. Sadly, after all that buildup, his E4 is actually remarkably mediocre. Enemies in the alt zone have their attack reduced by 15%. Not terrible, I guess, but really rather dull by comparison. But then E6 sweeps in to really make up for it by being just the most absolutely bonkers, because at E6, his Ashen Roast stacks up to 9, and it now reduces all type res by 3% per stack, as well as the usual vulnerability. So, with full stacks, you're talking 55% vulnerability and 27% all-type res reduction. A cumulative 1.97 damage multiplier. That's damage amplification brushing up against Robin. But yeah, for 7 copies, you'd kind of expect that. Now, I'm certainly not saying you need to get him to E6. I mean, if you can, then sure, go ahead. He'll be a monster. But no, my sensible, free-to-play Husbando recommendation is to take Jiaoqiu to E1 S1. Now, I don't mean to say that he needs to be E1 S1. He's still very good at E0 S0. I just mean to say that taking him to E1 S1 is absolutely worth the investment. And obviously, don't go spending what you can't afford. Don't burn through your savings for whichever future sexy man you've been saving for just to get Jiaoqiu. Husbando over meta, always. But maybe consider making a plan to get him to E1 S1 at some point. He's just so good. We only have one limited 5-star male harmony, and he can only be on one team at a time. Jiaoqiu is a fantastic damage amp for that second team. Will we get another, better male damage amp in the future? It's entirely possible. In fact, Anaxa at E2 S1 actually can beat out Jiaoqiu when played with another erudition character. But that's way more investment requiring E2 S1, and it effectively limits him to only being that good of a buffer for Jingyuan or other erudition main carries. But as of now, Jiaoqiu remains the best male universal damage amp in the game, and getting him to E1 S1 just makes him all the better. And just who is he a good damage amplifier for? Well, legitimately anyone who needs to do more damage. He is a wonderful addition to boot hill and break teams as a whole, because vulnerability actually factors into the break damage formula, unlike bonus damage or attack percent from other amps. He's arguably best in slot for a ratio team, since he not only increases damage, but he also applies debuffs that ratio needs for his whole deal. He's really good for teams with heavy SP consumption, like Imbibitor, because he can apply Ashen Roast and maintain his damage amplification without having to spend many, or even any, skill points. He's fab in Pure Fiction and for Jingyuan, since he can debuff the entire field of enemies very easily and can maintain those debuffs effortlessly. And he's, of course, perfect for HP scaling characters like Mide or Blade, because they can benefit from damage increases through vulnerability more than through attack percent that may come from other buffers. Finally, he's really good for characters like Moza, who can't easily be the target of buffs. Granted, that only really applies to Moza at the moment, but who knows if we'll get more untargetable characters in the future. Jiaoqiu's just great for any team is what I'm saying. Contrary to the naysaying rumblings that have followed him since his release, Jiaoqiu is far more than just an Acheron bot, particularly to us Husbando collectors. He is our best universal damage amplifier and, for me, was a welcome replacement for Tingyun and Hanya in my teams. There has not been even a single moment that I have regretted getting him to E1 S1, and I expect anyone else would feel the same. But where do you stand? Do you think I'm overselling him, or are you just as chuffed to bits with him as I am? Let me know in the comments. So, there we are, another guide video. Even though he's an older character, I like to think he's still good enough to warrant discussion, if only to dispel the myth that he's only an Acheron bot. So, thank you so much for watching. If you like this sort of thing, please like and subscribe, hit that notification bell to get notified when I post more videos. I'll be trying my Anaxa guide soon, as best I can, and I'll do a ratio guide for his upcoming rerun, so you can come back for those if you would like. Or maybe you want to see how my Jiaoqiu pulls went oh so many moons ago. You can check that out as well. Have a look around the channel is all I'm saying. You may find something you like. Anywho, thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!